So welcome to this session. We're going to look at screening for diseases. This is an important topic in epidemiology. So in this session, we are going to look at what screening is and why we do it. How can we differentiate it with diagnosis? And if we are to run a screening program, what criteria can we follow in deciding whether we should carry out the screening program or whether the screening program has been a success or we have actually wasted resources. And then the other aspect that we are going to look at is the challenges and the limitations of the screening programs. So screening is very important because it allows us to detect diseases early enough. Because sometimes individuals can have diseases and they are unaware that they actually have certain diseases. Okay, so this is what we call asymptomatic patients. They are unaware or they don't have signs and symptoms of a particular disease, but the disease is actually happening. So screening is concerned with the process of detecting these disorders or risk factors in people who are unaware of them. So we can also say that it involves methods and techniques or procedures and examinations for early detection, early and rapid detection of unrecognized diseases or defect in people who are actually looking healthy. So this early detection is very important because it allows public health officials to plan for care. They allow the patient to actually start seeking for care, and this will improve their quality of life or generally health outcomes. So screening is basically it can lead to a final diagnosis. Okay, well, for example, we can say that people are gathered and we check for their blood pressures, and then for those that have high blood pressure can now be referred to a clinician to confirm the diagnosis of having hypertension. So screening is not the final confirmation, but it allows us to be able to refer patients for the final diagnosis to be made. So there is what we call the iceberg phenomenon. This phenomenon illustrates what happens in a population. We will have people who are sick and they are clinically sick. That means they have signs and symptoms. And these people are the ones who come to the hospital. Some may recover, some may die. So they are people that we know that have particular conditions, but there are people that we actually don't know that are staying within the communities and they are having conditions, and the number of cases could be many, but we are unaware because we have not diagnosed them with the condition. So usually the people who are within the communities or within the populations and have not come out to approach healthcare service providers, they are invisible, like we can't see them in. So when we have our numbers about the prevalence of, for example, hypertension, we may rely on those that have approached us, yet the prevalence of hypertension could be high, but these people have not come to us. So we in a way call them invisible cases. So that is what we call the iceberg phenomena, that few people that have clinical signs and symptoms will appear to us. And then those within the community could have these conditions, but they have not manifested and they have not yet approached us. So they are in a way invisible. So we move to diagnostic tests. Suppose when a patient goes to the hospital with, let's say they have headache, a number of tests can be carried out. Can be a malaria test, it can be a glucose test, it can be a strep throat test, it can be a pregnancy test, it can be a chest X-ray. A number of tests can be carried out, and then the doctor will make a diagnosis that this patient is actually suffering from this condition. Now, when it comes to screening, not all conditions are suitable for screening. There are certain conditions that we can screen for, and we shall look at the criteria for screening these conditions. But usually, in most cases, we screen for cancers, hypertension, hearing issues, vision and dental screening, and other conditions. This list is not exhaustive. So how can we carry out this screening? We can mobilize people within the community and then organize a kind of camp for screening the NCDs, for example. That's what is called mass screening. We can also have what we call multiple screening procedure or multiphasic screening, where there are a series of tests that can be carried out on a patient. If, for example, in test 1 they are positive, then they are referred to do test 2. Okay, and then if test 2 is positive, then they can now be referred to phase 2 physician for confirmation of the diagnosis. We can also carry out a targeted screening campaign or program where we check for people who have been exposed to particular exposures or toxins or environmental exposures generally. So that means that we identify people who are at a particular risk. And then we have what we call a case finding or optimistic. This is where the patient goes to a physician for a different reason. And then the physician requests the patient to carry out another test. So, for example, you have a wound. You have a wound on your leg, and then you explain that this wound has not been healing. And then the physician suspects that it could be an issue with diabetes. Your wound may not be healing because of diabetes. So the doctor now refers you to the laboratory for a test for your blood sugar. Okay, so depending on what they can get, that is a case for what we call optimistic screening. You have gone to the physician for another reason, but then he refers you to be screened for another disease. So do we need to screen every condition? Under what circumstances can we screen for a particular disease? One, the disease should have significant public health impact in terms of what is the burden of the disease, what mortality does it cause, and the disability that comes, or the reduced quality of life that comes with the disease. We don't want to misuse our resources, So we want to put resources where they are needed and where we can have optimal health outcomes. So you don't want to run a screening campaign for a rare disease that does not have what we call public health importance. And then the other second point is that you should know how the disease actually progresses within an individual. That means that the disease should have what we call a preclinical phase, such that when you can detect the disease during this phase, the intervention that happens afterwards can lead to improved health outcomes. That means that you need to know the natural history of the disease. And then the tests that you should use should be reliable and effective. This is to say that they should be able to detect the disease at early stages. This is very, very important. And then the next point is that the screening tests should be accurate. This is to say that it should be accurate with high sensitivity. Sensitivity is, it refers to the fact that the condition that you're testing, if it turns out positive, the person should actually have that disease. So the test, when the test is positive, the person should have the disease. And then you should carry out a test that is acceptable to the target population. Usually, you want to carry out a test that is maybe amongst the high-risk population groups. Okay, but however, you should also make sure that the screening is not overly invasive and causing a lot of discomfort to the population or to individuals. And the cost should also be taken note of. Okay, there should be proof that early treatment of the condition can actually improve health outcomes. It does not help for you to detect the disease early, and yet there are no treatment plans that can actually improve health outcomes for these individuals. Okay, so that means that the disease should really be a very should have high public health priority, and that means that if you are able to improve people's health outcomes, then that means that it's worth the investment. We also look at the cost implication of the screening program. It should be cost effective, meaning that there should be benefits associated with early detection and the intervention. Okay, so early detection and the intervention afterwards should outweigh the costs of the screening program. That means that the screening program should actually give benefits in terms of the lives saved or the quality of life improved as a result of the screening. You don't want to use a lot of money for screening, yet later on after detection, it doesn't have a lot of impact. So there is what you call the Wilson-Jagna criteria for disease screening. It basically has the things that I've earlier on described, but some, of course, may not be in this criteria. Aspects to do with the fact that you should have the facilities to be able to carry out the diagnosis and treatment. So that means that if you carry out the screening, the diagnosis can be made and then the treatment can be started. If you do the screening and there is no confirmation of the diagnosis and there is no treatment, then basically what are you doing it for? Okay, the disease, of course, should have a latent period. This is to say that a disease should be it should be one that allows for the patient to not to show signs and symptoms for a considerable period of time, such that it allows you room, it gives you room to be able to detect the disease. Okay. Okay, so the other policies, the other point that I did not perhaps include above is one that there should be an agreed policy on who to treat as a patient. That means that you need to have a criteria for inclusion of who you regard as a patient. Okay. So we look at another component of screening. When you're running a screening test, you will have multiple people involved in this screening. It is taking blood samples, it is taking blood pressure. So you will have different people carrying out these activities. Your interest will be on the fact that the results of this screening procedure should be the same if different people actually carry out the test under the same conditions on the same patient. So if you have one person screening for blood pressure, and then they get their reading, if another person comes and takes the blood pressure of the same patient using the same equipment, they should have same results. If they are not, then we'll say that the results are not reliable. So sometimes this variance can happen. These variations can happen. It could be because of biological reasons, or because of the fact that people use different instruments, or the technique used by the screeners are not the same. So your interest is that the test should be highly reliable. So how do you determine the reliability of the screening tests? One method is what we call the percent agreement, which is basically illustrating it illustrates the proportion of cases where two observers or two repeated measurements agree. Okay, that is percent agreement. So if someone carries out a test and it is positive, another person comes and carries out and it's positive, then you are having a higher percent agreement. Okay, so it gives you the overall information about concordance between observations. So this is how you can calculate percent agreement. Suppose you have two observers who carry out a screening test for a particular condition. Okay, if we have 100 cases and both observers arrive at the same result, 90 out of the 100 cases, then it means that you can calculate the percent agreement as percent agreement according to the total cases divided, the agreement cases divided by the total cases, same as 100%. In this example, we get 90%. And then the other measure of reliability is the Kappa statistic. It basically follows the one that we have just described, which is the percent agreement. But in this case, it takes into consideration the fact that this agreement can be as a result of chance. So you need to make sure that the agreement is a real one. It's not by chance. So kappa values can range from -1 to 1. Okay, where 1 indicates a perfect agreement, and then 0 indicating agreement due to chance, and then values below 0 indicate less agreement than expected by chance. So the formula for calculating kappa statistic is agreement observed minus agreement expected divided by 1 minus agreement expected. Okay, the interpretation is that agreement observed is basically the number of cases where agreement actually happened. And then agreement expected is when you have the proportion of cases where agreement is expected by chance. Okay, so the interpretation is if you get more than 0.8, then you have excellent agreement. If you have between 0.6 to 0.8, then you have good to substantial agreement. 0.4 to 0.6, moderate agreement. And if you have 0.2 to 0.4, then you have fair agreement. If you have less than 0.2, that is poor agreement. So basically with the calculation, if you're given the values, you just substitute in and then get your figure. So another important aspect about screening programs or screening tests, what we call validity. So validity is concerned with what you're measuring is what you actually intended to measure. Okay, it measures what it is intended to measure. So validity of any tool, it relates to whether it can measure what it is intended to measure. So two aspects are concerned with the validity: sensitivity and then specificity. So we're going to look at each of these. So here we have sensitivity, which is that you want to test people who have a disease to test positive. Those who have the disease should test positive. That is sensitivity. And then specificity, those who don't have the disease should test negative. That is specificity. So now the table that you have is an illustration of what can happen. So you can run tests, okay? So you run tests and then you get people who are positive and then people who are negative. So you draw a screening table, a 2x2 screening table. So the tests of people who have the disease and have tested positive are 80. And then the tests that are negative, but the people have the disease are 20. And then the tests for people who do not have the disease but are positive are 100. And then the tests for people who do not have the disease and are negative is 800. Okay, so if you calculate sensitivity, you have 80 over 100. Those who have the disease, okay, and have tested positive out of the total number of the cases tested. And then those that tested negative and they don't actually have the disease specificity, which is basically 80 over 900. So we have other terminologies that we use to characterize sensitivity and specificity. Okay, positive predictive value, which is basically the probability to be affected among the positive tests. Okay, so usually higher prevalence gives a higher positive predictive value. This is where now it refers to the concept that we looked at, that if the condition is prevalent, then we can consider a screening program. Partly because it allows us to have a higher positive predictive value. And then a negative predictive value, the probability to be unaffected among negative tests. And then PCC, which is basically the probability to be correctly classified. Okay, so the illustration that we had in the 2x2 table is basically this. TP, which is true positive, FP is false positive, and then FN is false negative, and then true TN is true negative. Okay, true negative is what you're interested in. You want people who test negative not to have the disease, that is true negative. True positive, you want the people who test positive should have the disease. Okay, you don't want to have a number of false positives and false negatives. You don't want to have that. Okay, so that table above, the earlier table, you can compute it in this nature. So for any calculations of positive predictive value, negative predictive value, you should construct this table. And when you construct it, it allows you to understand the formula that you can use. Okay. So sensitivity and specificity, the formula for each is actually given, plus the positive predictive value and the negative predictive value. Okay, earlier on we said that a screening test is not confirmatory. So a patient, one individual can go through a series of tests before the confirmation can be made about their condition. So that was the two-stage screening we talked about. There's this slide, which is the probability to be correctly classified. Okay, remember we already noticed the calculation for positive predictive value and negative predictive value, but we did not look at the probability to be correctly classified, PCC. So basically, you need to have the additions of true positives and true negatives divided by all the tests that have been carried out. That gives you what we call the probability to be correctly classified. Okay, so if you want to do the calculation, when you're given the figures, just pick out the true positive, true negative, and then add them up and then divide it by all the tests that you have. Okay, so in this case, the answer is 0.9. Okay, this indicates that the screening test has a high probability of correctly classifying individuals who have the disease or who don't have the disease. So there is a 90% chance. Okay, so if you get 1 as the PCC, then that is perfect. Okay, if you get something close to 0.5, then random chance classification. Okay, so there is 50-50. Okay, if you get less than 0.5, then you're not performing well. That means that the results are worse than having to toss a coin. So you're basically not sure of this, where you're going to be. So like I mentioned earlier on, that you can carry out two-stage testing, where you have screening for a particular condition in having a series of tests. They can be sequential or non-sequential. So usually you can perform the first test. Okay. Now, if the test turns out to be positive, then the patient or the individual can be referred to the second test. Okay, so the second test is basically to confirm the diagnosis. Okay, so the advantage of having this is that it reduces false positives, and also it is cost efficient, and there's optimal resource utilization and maintains sensitivity. So basically here, the key point here is that you don't want to have someone who you test positive and then you go with that worry on the first test without having a confirmatory test. The cost associated with that in terms of money is huge, because you are basically may start someone on treatment yet they actually don't deserve that. So when you do a two-stage testing process, it can reduce elements where you have people enrolled to certain programs, yet they are not supposed to. Commonly, they can be used in the newborn screening or even HIV testing, and also survival. A biopsy can be performed, and the same thing with HIV, where a PCR can be done to confirm the diagnosis. So when you perform, when you carry out a screening program, you later on need to evaluate and see what are you changing. Okay, now what has the screening program brought? What change or what impact has it come, or the outcomes associated with the screening program? So we look at three issues: mortality, morbidity, and then disability. So how many lives can be saved, or the quality of life that people will have after the screening, or the how life has been prolonged. So those are key issues that you can look at. So the issues with screening is that they can result into overdiagnosis, diagnose people with conditions that are not necessarily harmful. So that's a challenge, because it results into using resources that could perhaps be used in other interventions. And so this correlates with overtreatment. Okay, and then you can also have issues of false negatives and false negatives. These inaccurate results cause psychological trauma. Of course, they can also have financial implications. So you don't want to have false positives and false negatives. Stigma associated with a false positive result, or even a positive result, and then equity issues, where you have particular individuals actually utilizing the services, yet others are not having access to them. So sometimes you need to be concerned about biases that can happen in screening programs. One is what we call patient self-selection. You have patients who are higher socioeconomic class coming for these screening programs. Okay, so that means that even there is a difference between health outcomes of those of higher socioeconomic class compared to those of lower socioeconomic class. So that means that you're not getting a homogeneous population coming for screening programs, and this causes bias. And then you have the lead time, which is a false impression. It's a bias issue, which is basically a false impression of improved survival in screening population without affecting the mortality. So the point here is that early detection of a particular disease may not necessarily mean that it has significant impact on the mortality. Okay, because, for example, cancer, when diagnosed early, it could be that actually the disease is is in its earlier stages, and that at the end of it, the patient will actually die of the same cancer. So the screening program may report increase in survival or improvement in survival, but yet the survival is basically following the natural course of the disease. In this case, for example, cancer, where eventually the person actually die. Okay, and it may also take time to detect some of these diseases, and some diseases may actually be less aggressive, or some, for example, some cancers may be less aggressive. So you have people staying with the disease for a longer period, and then you attributing that to a screening test. Yet actually the disease itself is less aggressive. So those are issues of bias that can happen in a screening program. Thank you very much.